Communication is kind of like Swiss cheese. How can you hold someone to account that is trying their absolute best? There's stuff that wears away at your employees. Are they responsible for their mistakes? Okay, everyone, welcome to the third General Manager National Call, which is a call where general managers and head coaches and program leaders and developers, as well as any staff member that's interested in developing their leadership skills and kind of just being involved in a conversation for management and how to develop not only your own skills, but the skills of the people around you, and kind of just delving into topics and issues that we commonly face together. So that's the purpose and intention of this call. And today I am joined by some really awesome people. Throughout the call, they'll be sharing their own experiences. And today's call is especially going to be relying on kind of the wisdom in the room, other people's experiences, and we're going to delve into what they really want to talk about. So we'll be using a Socratic method for this, which is basically all that means is I'm going to be posing some questions that should incite some critical thinking and also really get us into the ballpark of how to approach really common issues with a solution-oriented mindset. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen here. And what I would love for you to do is just check this out. On this screen, I have a list of topics. And these topics are what I have been in the last few months really commonly coming across with everybody that I've been working with in the community. These are the questions and kind of just like areas that people are like, man, how do I address this? What do I do for this? And people are at different stages in these categories. So these categories are developing self-awareness in employees, establishing accountability, creating effective communication channels, building manager-employee relationships. And then I'm going to say, in my opinion, probably the most important one, preventing resentment and encouraging buy-in. So out of these topics, here's my request. My request is that one person just volunteers who will go and just select a category that you're kind of interested in exploring a little bit more. So I'm going to pause there. And if you before you choose as well, if you'd like me to elaborate a little bit on what that category could entail, I'm happy to do that with you as well. So at this point, I'll take a digital hand, or someone can just come off of mute. And yeah, go for it. Joey, Adrian, please.
Yeah, so all of these are fantastic, by the way. I want to start with establishing accountability, specifically when funds are low, and so there's no push for a raise or a push for more money, but still holding people accountable.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So that would be kind of a barrier in the way to accountability is you don't have the incentive of money, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay, awesome. So here's my question, and I want you to just engage with me here as just like a discussion. The question is for someone, and are you talking about coaches right now, or are you talking about like a front desk person? What's the accountability that you're specifically like referring to here?
The accountability would be whatever the job title is, not just meeting the title bare minimum, but holding yourself accountable to making sure that you are presenting yourself in like the best way possible within that job title.
Okay, very good. So we're getting somewhere really like kind of fleshed out, and I can hear what you're aiming towards, which is like, how do I encourage someone to relate to themselves as an accountability so that they are acting and functioning as this accountability, and all of the nuances of that accountability. Am I getting that right, Joey? Is that
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
So here's my question, because there's kind of like there's a bunch of different angles we can approach this, but here's how we'll get into the ballpark of this. And here's the question, what does accountability look like in daily work activities for this person? If I was a camera on the wall, what would I see them doing distinctly as that accountability? So if we take like a sales representative, for example, what I would be looking for, and I don't want to give you the answers. I have some good answers to this, but I'll give you one example, okay? One thing I could see is them meeting a deadline of making a certain amount of calls by a certain time. So that's one answer to what does their accountability look like in daily work activities. That's one possible answer to that question. What are some others? Yeah, Sam, and then I want to circle back to Joey. I want those gears turning.
I think what comes to mind for me in like a general sense is like it's just like clearly and like effectively like doing your job description.
Yeah, totally. Now, this is really good because if a job description is really fleshed out and it's a good job description, the expectations of that job are very clearly articulated in the description. So there's no question at that point of what that person should be doing. And on the flip side of that, that person has no question as well about what. Even more importantly than what they should be doing is what? What do you think? Even more important than what someone should be doing is
why they should be doing it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's buy-in. That's buy-in. And this also a good job description establishes what you should be doing, but also what? Yes, Quinn.
What you are doing.
Yeah, okay. What you are doing. Very good. So I'm hinting at doing. Thank you, Christian. Yes, what you shouldn't be doing as well. and now Quinn and Marcus, you fleshed out much more thoroughly what you should be doing and what a job description should be addressing. So that is excellent. And what I was leading the group towards was what you shouldn't be doing, which is that enmeshment of job descriptions where you have multiple people in an organization that are, or even one person that's taking on multiple accountabilities, and they're kind of doing cleaning and something here, and sometimes they help it out with front desk, and sometimes they're a coach, and sometimes they're training people. Then that's a breeding ground for a lot of things, but mostly resentment. And it's how can you hold someone to account that is trying their absolute best to like hold together multiple accountabilities? It's really hard. It's really difficult. So that's just something to point out and something that's really important. I see a couple of hands raised. Let's go to Christian, then we'll go right to Charles.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I think a key factor in that is especially when somebody goes into a new role. So regular meetings, one-on-ones is, I think, really helpful. And then when somebody goes into a new role, more regular one-on-ones to make sure that you guys are both on the same page about expectations, make sure those expectations are being met, and make sure that the expectations are reasonable. And then as if they're meeting those expectations, then you don't need to meet as often. And I suppose if somebody let's say you're in a situation where you're somebody is not meeting expectations, and they've been in that role, but maybe you're just realizing it or coming into the situation. Then I think it just is a matter of getting on the same page and setting those, like, essentially your kind of boundaries, and making sure they really know their job roles. And then you can set up some regular meetings that could then potentially taper off. And I think like last week, the giving them an opportunity to do a self-assessment as well could be super valuable.
So well said, Christian. And I really appreciate you painting a vivid picture of what effective communication looks like, and also how that contributes to establishing accountability. And so this is why it's so fascinating, because I was just describing this to someone yesterday that I was talking to. Culture within a business like a parkour gym is very much so like a rubber band ball. And each rubber band leads into each other to create the culture. And you can see how it's important for when you're establishing accountability that you have these effective communication channels created where you are meeting, you are relating to that person as that accountability. Your conversations are centered around these daily work activities. What deadlines are they meeting? Are they responsible for their mistakes? Are they proactively communicating their progress in their position or any obstacles that they're experiencing? So that's so well said. I love that you pointed that out, and it is critical and crucial to have that set up, to have someone established with their accountability. Please, Charles, thank you for your patience.
All good. That kind of ties into just like one little note that I've had from my project management side of things is I've had best success asking someone to set their own tasks with due dates, or if you need to give them a task, ask them when they think they can get it done. And then once you have agreed upon that date, you can gently follow up, or like, so that way you're not constantly chasing people around and like do micromanaging and all this other work. You can just be like, hey, you said you're going to like make X many calls by the end of the week. And then it's just like middle of the week, you're like, yo, how are those calls going? And then end of the week, you be like, hey, how many calls did you make? Like it's very straightforward, because they've made the commitment. You're not placing anything on them to try and complete. So that kind of self-efficacy has been the most effective for me as far as like me having to do less work and them completing the stuff that they said they were going to do.
Ding, ding, ding. Where's my air horn? So yeah, dude, Charles is nail on the freaking head, it's so beautiful and so simple, but just, you're so right. Asking for a by when, hey, by when can you complete that? Gives you a short-term promise that you then can manage. And then you're not managing people and personalities. You're managing the word of an accountability. So that's like, oh my God, I wish I could give you a gold sticker, because it's such a key to the kingdom. If you don't have that established or in place, you are definitely missing a key aspect for accountability. Nice job, Charles. Slam dunked that one. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so the next question, and Joey, I'm going to circle back. Or actually, sorry, not Joey. Joey, I will circle back to you. But Sam, I want to circle back to you for this question, because it really has a lot to do with what you said about job descriptions. But my question is, how can clear expectations, establishing that as an employer and as an employee, knowing what the expectations are, how can that enhance your sense, like literally your sense of accountability? What does that provide? What does that get rid of? What does it add? Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just having like really clear metrics is like the biggest thing there. It's like, I am acting specifically as a function of this. And so one, there's like a million things to fine tune there, you know? It's like, if you have like intentionality there, there's just like, you can like actually optimize that. Whereas like, if you are like the jack of all trades running around doing whatever, you know, it's like that. I don't know, unless you're like an insane perfectionist with like God's eye, I don't know how you like get better at that, you know?
Yeah, very good. So you can just hear like it's a recognition for that this is going to set a measurable standard for that employee. It's like, oh yeah, but there's no question. It's not ambiguous, and I don't have to go off of like feelings about my job. It's like, am I doing my job? Well, let's check my measurable standards, you know? And I love when people feel like they're doing a great job. And so circling back to what Christian said, making sure that your expectations are reasonable and like very clearly articulated. Like, yeah, hey, we could probably hit these standards, you know, this is not a stretch. And that feels freaking good. And then you have something to acknowledge as a manager, as a head coach. You're like, wow, look at these standards that are being met. And then if they're not being met, it's not a personal conversation. Going back to what Charles said, you know, maybe it's just a matter of setting deadlines and managing promises being met and kept around those standards. Yeah, please continue, Sam.
Yeah. If you have like clear expectations and boundaries, it like allows you to become like part of a greater whole. Whereas like, if you are not that way, then, you can be a part of a greater whole, but it's more like you are, it's never clear like what you're doing, you know?
Yeah. And you can hear that this kind of thinking requires an understanding of how to create a collaborative environment where you know, there's an awareness of what you do and what you don't do and who does what. And I love this analogy. There's people that could twist this analogy and make it sound kind of evil or manipulative. That's not how I mean it. But if you look at a business, if you look at it like you're playing chess, you have to know what each role in the business, how it moves, so that you can play the game effectively. You know, if you're a bishop, you can move diagonally, and you wouldn't put that person in a situation where they would have to move, you know, vertically. You would be aware of exactly what they're capable of and how they're capable of it. And you would make sure that they know that too. And then all they have to do is their one thing. And that makes it so much simpler and so much easier. And I'm pointing to as well, you can just hear the preventing the resentment piece is, I think it's so important. And doing this kind of thinking of like, well, what should a coach do? Well, a coach should probably be coaching. Okay. Well, if that's the case, what's everything that a coach is doing in my gym that isn't coaching? How can I either like remove that in some way or make sure that like it's not a detraction from the main accountability? Is my coach also doing these other things? So super, super important. Anything else that you want to say about that, Sam?
No.
Sweet. Awesome. All right, Joey, let's circle back over to you. Is there anything that we didn't address within establishing accountability so far that you wanted to dive into a bit deeper?
That section fairly well addressed. It just goes into questions about other sections, specifically developing self-awareness in employees.
Yeah,
because a lot of the things that were talked about is reliant on some level of self-awareness, which goes into the accountability.
Yeah, very good. So the first thing we want to establish is, why is self-awareness crucial for personal and professional growth? Why would you want this in the business at all? That's just a question I'm posing to the group. So Why is self-awareness a critical aspect? Why would we even focus on this? Why is it an issue that at all that we come across? Why is it a problem when it's missing? That's a good question. Yeah, Marcus, please.
Because whoever is in charge doesn't have an infinite amount of awareness. So spreading the awareness around each individual role is kind of why that role exists in the first place. And then I think it also eliminates micromanaging, because if someone is in a role and they don't necessarily understand how or why or what to do in that role, somebody else is then going to have that awareness to go, hey, that's not how or why or what you should be doing, as opposed to that individual being self-aware and being able to auto-regulate and go, oh, wait, I should be doing this instead of that, or this is how I should be doing it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, exactly. And I love that. Oh my gosh. It really provides insight when people have self-awareness within your business and your company. It has them have insights into how their role affects other people and what it provides to the business and how it contributes to the overall mission, and your limitations as a manager or as a head coach. They can see, because you're pointing to something so critical. It's really important that they see what you count on them for. If I go up to any person within a business and I say, what do people count on you for here? What do they rely on you for? What are you reliable for here? I will get some interesting answers to that question. And if people have a strong response to that question, usually they also have a strong sense of self-awareness as an employee. So yeah, really well said, Marcus, and great point. Awesome. So my next question, and Joey, I'd love for you or anyone else to jump in on this one. So the question then becomes, how do you assist employees in identifying the skills that they need to develop? What are the ways, what are the structures or systems that you can put into a job so that at a job, a function of their job is pointing out and identifying these skills that they need to develop and encouraging this self-awareness? What are some of the ways we can assist people? Yeah, please, Joey, please. Yes. I don't want to give the answers away. I want this to be collaborative. So please.
Yeah. I think a lot of what we talked about earlier with establishing exactly what the expectations are and what their roles are, as well as checking in and, like Charles said, asking them how they're doing, having them self-assess upon those specific roles that are already set is a really big part of that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So, and you're now the third person on this call. I mean, fourth if you count me. That's echoing the importance of an established meeting where you relate to each other as accountabilities, and you are actively talking about different aspects of the accountability, talking about by-whens, talking about deadlines, talking about specific actions being taken as that accountability, and moving it as much out of the realm of identity as possible. Please, Charles.
So I've seen this done a few different ways, at different gyms around the country. One that I've seen is if you don't have a head coach, auditing each other, building a culture of auditing each other's classes to where that's just a normal thing that is done. To where it's say it's Chris's class. I show up as a student, I'm another coach at Chris's gym. I show up though as a student, but I bring a little notebook. At the end of it, there is a set amount of time, either at the end of that class or later that day or something like that, where we sit down and I play the role of a head coach or other things and give positive and constructive feedback around that. But we all do that with each other. So that there is just this culture of coaches coaching coaches. If you have a head coach structure, then I believe that should be delegated to what that head coach is, because a head coach is the person who coaches other coaches. So then other coaches don't need to take time out of their day to audit somebody else's class, other things like that. And instead you have a coach who's floating, covering around, taking notes, making time to spur these moments of self-reflection with both like positive and negative critique. So like you'd sit them down at the end and be like, hey, what do you think you did well here? What didn't go so well during class today? How do you think you would address that if it came up again in the future? Which is all stuff that's usually covered in like coaching certs, but like building that systematically into your week, either having a dedicated role of somebody whose job is to do that for other people, or to put that as part of the tasks coaches need to complete throughout their week, to be like, hey, you got to audit at least one class per week, right? Something like that. But then when they do it, that facilitates that self-awareness, both of the person doing the auditing, because they're now viewing this from a perspective of a student and how they would do it differently, as well as from the coach's side of things, getting somebody to ask them questions, give them feedback, to have them ponder on like what they just did and how it was viewed by other people. I think I've seen that to be, I found that to be, for myself, having done most of the parkour certs, to be the most valuable part of my coaching experience, was having the other coaches audit what I was doing and tell me what they thought, how it went, and then aligning my perspective of how I thought it went to like the students and other coaches' like lived experience, and making sure that those are aligned. Right.
Beautiful. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Just phenomenal answers from Joey and Charles. Like, seriously, you guys knocked it out of the park. That's so if the question is, how can you assist employees in identifying the skills that they need to develop? You know, the answers are super clear. On Joey's side of things, he's like, hey, you know, there has to be a recognition of setting very clear expectations and goals, and then checking in on those things. Also echoing what Christian was saying. And then Charles, you know, your suggestion of those types of feedback mechanisms, peer-to-peer feedback mechanisms, are proven to be like the strongest and most effective feedback mechanisms that you can implement in a team structure, you know? And if you can have your head coach be a role model and mentor, and really adopt that role, that's like stellar. That's incredible. All of the job descriptions that I create and give out for head coaches and district head coaches have a specific bullet in there about being a role model and a mentor and what that entails, because it is a specific practice of being responsible for people's growth and development, and having an idea of who they are as a coach and where they are and what they need to do to continue to improve. And that's like that's a nuanced thinking. For anyone listening to this call, like on YouTube or something, I wrote a blog article called Head Coach, the Unsung Hero, that just kind of dives into a lot of those like nuanced skills that a head coach has to provide, like what Charles is talking about. And for anyone that's interested in making their own like really powerful job description, that's a good blog article to check out. Cool. So that's awesome. We definitely kind of really drove a spike into developing self-awareness in employees. I have a few other ways that we can kind of dive into that topic, but I want to zoom out again and just check in with the group. Do we want to keep going into developing self-awareness in employees, or do we want to zoom out and go into another category here? Now's a good opportunity to speak up.
I'd be curious if anybody's had experience facilitating that without those more formal structures that I was speaking to, right? Like, if you're just another coach in the gym and you're like, hey, I think this guy could probably do things better, but like our gym doesn't do like head coach audits or like or coaching hour meetups or like group chats or other things like this. Has anybody had any success in kind of like cultivating that?
I would love for Quinn to share. Oh, and Quinn has their hand raised. Please, Quinn.
Oh,
yes.
Hey.
Great.
So yeah, I've been a head coach at a place where we were doing a lot of budgeting, and because of our budgeting, we didn't have time for trainings at all, and we didn't really have an audit system in place either. And so what we ended up doing was a lot of essentially audits, but it wasn't on like an official system. It was just somebody observing that class and then going in and having a one-on-one conversation to like talk about what they could do better. And like you're saying, like it does kind of need to be from a role who's like assigned that. So you do need to like have somebody in a head coach role if that is occurring. Because like if it's just like some random coach who's like, hey, I'm doing this now, I'm doing audits, it doesn't really like, I'm going to check out your class and tell you what you can do better. It doesn't really come across really well. And you want somebody who's really trained at also coming across really like from a place where they obviously want to help. That has to be really apparent in what they're saying. So if you're like coming into somebody's class and you're like, hey, I'm just going to rip your class apart, you suck, like it's not going to work effectively. Like you have to have somebody who's say like, hey, like you did a really great job. Here's some things that I think would really help you as a coach improve. And that's pretty useful there. But that being said, I do find having an official audit system to be the best way to go.
Yeah, please, Christian. Nice. And thank you so much for sharing, Quinn.
I was just going to add in that I think one of the other topics directly, it's almost like these topics tie into each other. The building manager and employee relationships, I think, is a huge factor for that, because if you don't have something official in place, if you as a manager or if you as an employee have a good enough relationship with your manager, hopefully the employee is comfortable going to the manager and saying like, or the manager is regularly just chatting with employees saying, oh, how are classes today? How is so-and-so doing? I know they're new, stuff like that. So that things can at least come up in conversation and it doesn't feel like you're tattling or I don't know, anything negative. It feels like a positive thing.
Yeah, really well said. And they definitely all tie into each other for sure. And, you know, one of the questions that I get quite often is why is it that an employee wouldn't come to me as a manager? Why would they share what they're dealing with and what they don't like about their job with their peers first? Why would they do that? So that's a question I'm asking. Why do you think that is? Why do you think? Yeah, please, Quinn. Why do you think it is that they would talk with each other and not a manager?
When I asked my mom this, she told me that it's because that they don't think you're a safe space to divulge information. So you have to create yourself as a safe space for their information to be actually heard and listened to, and also as like a source to actually like when they come to you for problems, you'll actually help them and be on their side.
Wow!
And somebody who's going to
imagine that
and like fuck them up.
Yes. Yeah. Very good. And this is so key. So, and look, on this call, there may not be someone on this call that is dealing with this right now, but I guarantee that there is someone listening to this that is dealing with this. The last 3 gym calls that I was on this week, if someone was dealing with some sort of, I'm going to call it this, listen close to this. This is super cool. And if you can get it for what it is, I'm going to call it a culture of gossip. So this is something I'm going to write about and create content for. This is the first time I'm kind of talking about it openly, but all this is, it's really simple. It's just when, if you look at what culture is repeated actions taken by a group of people. Okay, that's what culture is. It's just the repeated actions taken by a group of people. Then if we look at gossip, what I'm saying gossip is gossip is when someone has a problem and they share that problem with someone that has no power to do anything about it. And so in organizations, what happens is you have these pockets of people that are all talking about the stuff that they're tolerating about their position, or about things that aren't working about their position, things that they really don't like, resentments that are developing. And then they share about it with each other. And then you as the manager, maybe you get hints of it. Maybe there's someone like on the team that is like kind of closer with you, and they're like, oh yeah, these people are pissed about this policy that you put out. And you're like, well, they didn't say anything to me. What the heck? That's a culture of gossip that you have on your hands. And it is insidious and it is nasty. And Quinn is pointing to like the garden that you need to tend to eliminate it. It's hard to eliminate, but people are sharing their concerns with their peers because they're afraid of the repercussions of sharing with their superiors. Like they're going to get retaliated against in some way, passive aggressively, or even with like a tone, or it's just going to cause some sort of contention. There's some sort of repercussion that they're fearing. And even if that's not true, like there's not going to be a repercussion, there's a fear of the repercussion. You got to get that. There's a fear that's stopping them. There's also a perception. That's the first thing, the fear. The second thing is there's a perception that you as a manager are unapproachable in some way. There's something about you that makes you unapproachable. You got to figure out what that is and really be vigorous about eliminating it. Maybe it's that you're too busy. That's what I come across a lot, guys and gals and thems, babies. I come across, oh, I can't get to my manager is doing way too much. My superior, they're too busy. And it's so like noble and gets you off the hook for being available for hearing your concerns for your employees. So that's another one, is that, oh, you're unapproachable in some way. Or maybe it's that you'll get mad. Or maybe it's that you'll be related to as a problem, like what Quinn was sharing that they were dealing with, which is really traumatic, by the way. Now, the third one, here's the third one. And this one's the most insidious one. This one's insidious. This is the last reason why employees will choose to share their concerns with their peers instead of their managers. And that is that their peers are just more sympathetic. There's a belief of that and an experience of that. So this one is a scary one because if everybody agrees that there's a problem, very quickly as a manager or as a head coach, you become the problem. And so just being aware of that, wow, people have a fear of a repercussion if they bring me something. There's a perception somehow that I'm unapproachable. And also there's probably a belief that I'm dealing with in the workplace that peers are just more sympathetic to issues. Knowing that is going to help you dramatically alter your approach to concerns that are brought to you and help you approach them from a much more sympathetic, empathetic place, a place where you can resolve things as partners rather than as in opposition. And you slowly have to educate your entire staff that you are an approachable person that wants to resolve issues. You want to be related to as someone that cares about what they're dealing with. And that can be difficult to shift, especially if you're super busy and not very available and far and removed. Please, Charles.
So that last point to where to where kind of it's like, oh, they'll be more sympathetic. I think something I think something that's worth noting there is I've seen that happen the most within businesses. Like a great example is the Undercover Boss TV show is like the perfect example of this, to where it's like a lot of times people will end up that way when they have decided to, when they have removed themselves from the environment which they work. So that doesn't mean that like, hey, your head coach does also need to be coaching classes because now he's not doing the job you've given to them, or like, hey, the GM should be like on the floor mopping. It's like, well, no, that's not the GM's job. But if you're like something that I've seen play out is it's like, well, I'm working all during the day before the gym's open, doing leads, doing X, doing Y. So like this evening, instead of being at the gym, I'm going to, go out to dinner, go to a concert, whatever. But if that becomes habitual and then it's like, cool, like I know I have that, like I've had previous bosses to where it's like, cool. Yeah. I haven't seen the owner in like 5 months. And last I checked, he was in Hawaii. Like that is what kind of, I feel, creates that culture of gossip, is because it's like, well, now there's this person that I can't relate to at all, that isn't around, isn't in our community at all.
And then comes in every 5 or 6 months and makes a bunch of sweeping changes that impact the people on the floor.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like
I've seen
that I think is like one of the bigger things to like be aware of and work against is like,
For sure.
even if it's inconvenient, it's like I can say as an employee, I would greatly appreciate being able to see and like build rapport with like the people that manage me rather than just have this dissonance of like, well, I only reach out to them when I need to discuss something that's problematic and I decide not to just gossip about it and actually do something. But that's much more intimidating with somebody that I haven't seen in 3 months. Even if it's not like a wall of like, oh, how are they going to react? It's just going to be the like, I haven't seen you and like, I haven't like chatted with you or like just hung out or even like seen how your life's going in a few weeks or months. And the first thing I'm going to do is drop like a bombshell on you from an employee perspective. It's like,
gosh,
that doesn't build good rapport either direction. So yeah, just something that I feel is worth noting with that one is like when you create tiers of responsibilities and separate roles, you will create dissonance between people, but there are ways around that. And I think that's maybe worth highlighting.
It's so worth highlighting. And you're actually like, you're pointing to something that's so important that most people don't acknowledge because oftentimes as managers or head coaches or people that are in positions of power or leadership, we look a lot at the dimension of like our actions to other people, you know, and you're pointing to, and I'm just going to circle this bullet here of establishing accountability. A big piece of establishing accountability that is just oftentimes not acknowledged is like, how often should I be interacting with this person as my accountability? You know, and what should they count on me for? What am I reliable for? You know, and I'll say this, one of the reasons why I can't say this without sounding like I'm bragging, so I'm just going to say it bluntly, but one of the reasons why I'm an effective manager, why I'm a good manager, and I know that about myself, and it's a point of pride for me, is because I actively tell people what they can count on me for and what they can rely on me for. And I would say even more importantly, I'm really proactive about telling people what I'm unreliable for. There are a lot of times where I'm really busy and swamped and like I'm not going to be good at checking my email, just my email. But I'll like get to people and say, hey, I'm unreliable for my email for like the next week. If you want to reach me, give me a call. And then I'll pick up the phone, you know, but I'm in communication about it, telling people you can count on me for this. You can't count on me for this, rather than having it be like, man, where's this guy at? He just sends his fucking Fireflies app to our meetings and then reads the notes or something. And then if he sees a red flag, he's just going to write up a policy and email it to me. You know, that sucks. I hate that type of leadership. So I think I'm really encouraging people to take a page out of what you're saying, Charles, and what I'm saying, which is, you know, if you're in a position of power or leadership, you have to really consider how often you should be interacting with other people's accountabilities and what they count on you for. You know, that's so critical. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's awesome. That's a dimension people don't consider. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that? Yeah, please, Nick, jump on in.
So just going based off of what you just said was a lot of like follow through as well. So every single one of the people that you work with hang on to a lot of your words as a manager. So like you might have had 10 conversations with 10 different employees that day, but each one of those employees typically will focus on what they have said to their manager. If that's you, then you need to make sure that you take note of those conversations so that way there is a follow through. Because if you come off as a manager that doesn't have any follow through, then you come off as unreliable. And I mean, that's the whole point of establishing that accountability and the reliability.
Yes. Following through on promises. It's so important. People remember what you say. And so if you don't remember what you say, you're going to have a real hard time as a manager, and you're going to destroy trust just absolutely destroy the first or second time that you don't do what you said you would do. Like, people are going to develop a listening of you as unreliable. One of the first things that I establish with new general managers or head coaches in a leadership position is, where the heck is your word stored? Where does it go? When you give your word to something, where does it go? for me, it's Google Calendar. If it's not on my Google Calendar, it's probably not going to happen, unless it's like something really weird or specific. I live by my calendar, and that's just the structure that works for me. So yeah, following through is so important. And the other thing that does that I just want to point out, and that Nick is very reliable for as a manager. Nick is a manager within our company, Freedom in Motion. He's a sales team director, so he manages sales teams across 3 different locations. And he's really good at showing genuine interest in our staff's development. And one of the ways that he does that is he follows through on his promises. And one of the ways that he does that is his communication is very consistent and it's very honest. He doesn't step over stuff. He's not worried about how people think about him or if they want to be friends with him. He can have tough conversations with people while still being considerate of their emotions and all of the nuances of the situations. He has consideration for that, but has the ability to have that impeccable candor, or that invigorating candor, I should say, not impeccable. Yeah, please, Nick.
Another thing, just based on what you said before as well, is like setting those expectations with your staff of like what you're reliable in and what you're not reliable in. So if they end up reaching out to you in maybe a way of communication that you're not reliable in, then it's almost on them based on what expectation you already set. So if you say that, if you give me a call and we talk about it and I said that I put it down in my notes, then obviously we should be accountable about that. However, if we say like, my email is not reliable, and then they email us for something that's extremely urgent and no other way of communication, then that might be on them. However, if we're able to talk with them and actively tell them that we are going to add it to our notes and we are going to get it done by set time, then yeah, it's always about how the staff perceive you by like following through on that. Even if you don't complete it in time, at least as long as you are communicating that it's being worked on, or that you're just staying in communication with that staff member regarding the thing that you talked about, it really goes a long way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So good. And establishing preferred methods of communication is one of the key pillars of creating an effective communication channel. Within the organizations that I'm a part of, I use Google Chat and email, and people can call me. I'm very responsive. Everybody knows I'm very responsive on Google Chat. I will usually respond like within a couple of hours, at the most like 12 to 24. Email is also a good way of getting a hold of me, but sometimes I get swamped with that. But the absolute best way to get a hold of me is call me. I'll call people back, and everybody knows that within this organization. So that's how they use that. And it's important that you don't have an informal network replace an official channel at your workplace. Something like an Instagram group chat. And that's how people are like asking for covers or communicating that they're going to be late to something. I just want to point out the dangers of that, and just be careful of that. If you're listening to this, rumors also start because information gaps are in your business. So you'll just kind of want to be aware of where those information gaps are. And a big one is informal channels of communications. And these permeate parkour businesses just because we're like a culture of people that jump and flip on things. I have a bunch of informal communication channels that I manage and I'm out part of, but I just make sure that official work related things stay in official work related channels. So that's another way to make sure that your channels stay effective. Cool. All right. Well, let's zoom back out. We have enough time to just kind of jump into one more category here. Is there anything else that anyone wants to jump into? We didn't actually, you know what? I wanted to jump into preventing resentment and encouraging buy-in. So I'm just going to ask one of these because I think it all ties into this. So what are some clear signs of early resentment developing within a team, do you think? What are like some clear signs that you've seen of like, there's probably some resentment brewing here? What have you seen? What have you heard? I have a bunch of examples But yeah, please, Nick, go ahead.
Lack of eagerness to fulfill like duties, or when you ask them to do something, they are very short with their answers. I've experienced this plenty of times in the past. And I mean, the best way to really combat that, really like bring that up, is to just like face it off and say like, hey, look, I've noticed some resentment. How have you been feeling? I'd love to be able to discuss this with you, so that way we can solve this.
So good. And you're pointing to, it's important to highlight that you're talking about a decrease in enthusiasm and participation. Some people like are just not very enthusiastic and are just short, and that's just how they are. I know some people like that, but some people you'll notice like, oh, there's some resentment brewing because usually they are enthusiastic or they have excitement. And they're like pulling away from that in a big way. Yes. Big time. Absolutely, Nick. Thank you for saying that. What are some other ways that you can tell resentment is beginning to develop in a team? What are some other ways? Yeah, please, Joey.
I mean, this kind of echoes that a little bit, but just generally speaking, a decrease in communication, just all types.
Super good. So here, stay with me on this one because you're right. Definitely a decrease in communication, but I would say another early sign of resentment is there's an increase in communication as well. What type of communication is there an increase in?
The nonverbal.
Yeah, yeah. You can kind of like feel the like, you know, there's some like FU energy coming from people. For sure. You can kind of describe it as like a negative attitude.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that is a very clear sign of resentment, is someone's got like a negative attitude in your business. And it's clear. Other people talk about it. You can see it. They can see it. You can feel it. You know, we're people and humans. We're really good at sensing that kind of like thing from people if the vibes are off. And so, you know, if someone's got a negative attitude, chances are there's some resentment brewing. Now, here's the other thing too, is you may come across people will actually make negative comments as well. Like, you know, not everybody is shy and just gives you like the silent FU. Some people will be very vocal and say, you know, and there will be like an uptick in negative comments. You'll hear them. So that's another sign that like, something's I should probably intervene, like what Nick was saying. And Nick, I gotta say, you saying like how you addressed it is so good, because you just immediately notice like, oh, there's just a lack of enthusiasm. I'm gonna jump right in and intervene and just see how I can support this person and address this. Gosh, that is what there is to do, is unravel each thread in that way and be really vigilant about observing those signs and then discussing those interventions, and being proactive about that is so important. Please, Charles, go for it.
Yeah. So the one that I think is kind of the most insidious, that I've seen play out in years past, was when people stop going the extra mile and start kind of the old school phrase is work to rule. The newer school phrase is act your wage. But when people just start like hitting the bare minimum of what they're asked to do, they show up for their coaching hours, but they get there like right beforehand. And just kind of roll with whatever's set up. You know, they're not there 10, 15 minutes early, like trying to like be like, oh, should I set up something fun? Or, oh, I've got a cool idea for today. Right. You don't have people volunteering to be like, oh yeah, you got like some after school program or something. Oh, that sounds fun for me. They're just like, nah, I'm good. If you're having people ask for coverage, being like, hey, I'm out of town. If it's like pulling teeth to get someone in there, or if GM or somebody has to step in to cover because the other coaches who are in town and not obligated to pick up that extra shift are not jumping at the chance to do it, I would say that's a big sign that potentially your relationships are starting to fail and there's some bad stuff playing out within your staff.
Dude, absolutely, big time, huge what you're pointing out for sure. And that is like all clear indications that you're dealing with someone that's like 100%, maybe not 100%, but mostly checked out from their position. and there's no like ownership or authoring, and that's I come across like that person has unresolved issues within, like unresolved resentment towards the business for sure. Their concerns either are not being addressed if they have brought them up, or they feel a sense of hopelessness with their position, like nothing they say or do will be able to change or impact their position. And you're right, that is a tricky situation, because what that person is concerned about and acting that way towards may be something that is rational, that you can fix. You just don't know about it. You haven't communicated it. It hasn't just gotten resolved. Maybe it's something like that. Or, and I've come across this too, maybe it's something that's irrational. Like the person just really feels like they don't get paid enough, but they're at the top of the pay ladder and they're unwilling to take on new accountabilities, like what you're saying. And they just want more money, and that's what they have a stick up their butt about. Like, it's hard to work with a person like that. And so it takes, and what I have done in those situations is have like a very open and honest conversation with them about my experience and their experience, and seeing if we can find some middle ground. But it's not an easy conversation. It's uncomfortable. And I have to lean into it and kind of just like get into the mud a bit with them and really just, address like, hey, here's my evidence for why I think you have a stick up your butt. I'm seeing, you're just, all the things you said, Charles, every opportunity I've brought, you don't seem into, I've heard comments from other people. You're showing up right at the edge of the shift. And look, granted, I'm not enforcing like a PIP, because there's not an aspect of your accountability that you're not technically fulfilling, blah, blah, blah. However, I will say this, Charles, in my documentation in the companies that I work with, I do specifically have qualities of culture that are attached to job descriptions that talk about specifically the type of attitude to bring to work, and what we and to expect a conversation if we see like, hey, you're kind of like, it seems like you really don't want to be here. I try to create a culture where you're wanted and not needed. But that's tricky, and it's a jigsaw puzzle, and I would love to talk about it for like 100 hours. And I probably will collectively at some point, but you're so like, I love you being on this call and sharing what you're sharing. Anything else that you want to, complete in that before we move on to Nick?
Yeah. Like the only thing I wanted to like asterisk with that is like, if you're defining a role for somebody and they're working to that role, like that is sometimes okay. Especially, it's like, you don't know, somebody could be like, yeah, this is a part-time job for me, and I'm also juggling a full-time job, and my dog is sick. Like, it's like there's moments like that. It's just more if you see kind of a continuous trend amongst multiple employees, or a shift in behavior where it was like, oh, we used to have these guys always volunteering or stepping up or other things, like, or bringing ideas to the gym, or they always used to show up 10, 15 minutes early, or do X, Y, or Z. And now they're not. It's more of the shift in behavior, in one direction or the other, that I think is worth noting.
Absolutely. And I think, and I would even assert that it's rare I come across someone that can't notice the shift. I feel like most people notice the shift. Where the problem is people don't address it when they notice it. They don't lean in and deal with it. Maybe they don't know how to. Maybe they don't have the resources to. But like, people can tell like, oh, this is uncomfortable in some way, but then they don't lean in, and it's tough. I understand it's tough. It's uncomfortable. There's a lot of unknowns when it comes to like kind of handling a conversation like that. Anyone that's a head coach or a manager knows that it's different with every person. But I do find, people notice it, but then they're scaredy cats about getting in there, and it's scary. It's scary, and that's when having a mentor goes a long way. Because even just yesterday, I was coaching someone in, hey, here's how you have a mediation conversation. Here's how you set the context for that. Here's how you present a potentially upsetting communication, and how you like kind of prepare the person for that so it lands gently. Here's how to approach that with tact and strategy. There's a lot that goes into it. So yeah. Anything else that you want to say about that, Charles? Cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Nick, please.
Yeah, so I have a couple of things to say. So there's from the start of somebody working, like whether it's the hiring process and qualifying them to see that they're a right fit with the culture, whether it's they've gotten hired and you're just setting those expectations during the job and how to act on the job. It is a crucial thing here that we do at FIM that Chris has really established, that if they can do the job, great. But it's more important that they need to be a fit for their culture. Because if they aren't, then it's going to be like pulling teeth later down the road. If you are setting expectations and you're feeling like they're fighting you down the road too, that's another thing that you have to face, which is not fun. As those things come up, you guys have already pretty much touched on this, but just hitting it at the root and just bringing it up to them in a way that they feel heard, so that way they can feel comfortable bringing those issues to your attention, rather than having resentment just fester away, and then it just becomes worse and worse, and then their performance steadily declines and there's no end in sight. So when there is any kind of resentment that does build up, facing it head on, asking them what's going on, but also, as every staff member should feel this way, and Chris has touched base on this quite a lot, is appreciation. So if the staff member, as well as all of the staff, feel appreciated and they feel heard, then that's going to play a heavy role in if they feel comfortable talking with you about those moments. So if you feel like there's any resentment, there's any issues with any staff member, and you go to them and they're hesitant about actually talking to you about that, a thing that's really helped me in the past is just sitting down with them, having a real conversation and saying, hey, look, this is what we're looking to expect from the role. I'm sensing some resentment. I want to talk about it, so that way we can solve this, and that way you can be happier. How does that sound? And it really has worked a lot in the past.
I was so sold, Nick. If you approached me like that and I was like a resentful, angry person about something, like, you know, it's clear that you're approaching me with the intention to help me get it resolved. And I think it's just so important to point out, well, you're giving us the keys of the kingdom of like, here's how to approach that conversation and what to do. And it's equally important to point out how not to approach it, which is like, if your staff is complaining about something, oftentimes it's difficult to approach someone with a solution-oriented mindset. That takes training. Usually a complaint is someone's attempt at asking for help with their position, and it's easy to take it personal. It's easy to take it personal, and a lot of bosses do. You know, Quinn was sharing earlier about the kind of more toxic environment that they were in, and that is a function of being related to as a problem when you bring up an issue. Now, I will also say that Quinn wasn't bringing these up in a way that was complaining. Quinn was bringing these up in solution-oriented mindsets and was still being related to as a problem because that particular person was so sensitive and really related to those things as like, you know, an attack of some sort. Quinn was related to as a problem. And that sucks for people. Don't do that ever. If someone's complaining or someone's bringing you an issue, stand side by side with them and look out at how to solve it together. You'd be surprised how far that goes towards just establishing trust and rapport and camaraderie between your team. It's very easy to do. I would say it's a very simple practice. I wouldn't say it's easy to do. I would say it's a simple practice. Please, Nick.
Another thing that's on the same topic, very similar to what I've already been saying, but before any resentment even shows, or maybe all of your staff are doing a great job, just showing appreciation makes it that much less likely that there will be any resentment that does develop within the community, because they already feel comfortable coming to you with said issue.
So well said. Yeah. And that's a track record. And you can rely on a track record. If you have a track record of success and examples of solving issues with people, I fall back on this all the time. I will actively say to my employees and general managers, you and I have a strong history of resolving things together. That's a statement that I get to say, woohoo, because we do. And I have a regard for that track record. And you can begin to establish that within your teams as well, which is awesome. So, okay. At this point, I would love for if anyone has any comments or any last remaining questions around these topics, now's your time to express them. And then we're going to get into wrapping up the call with a final question. So any final questions, comments, takeaways, anything like that before we move into just wrapping up this call? Yeah, please, Christian.
Unfortunately, I dropped for a second, so I hope that this wasn't discussed more than I think it was. But, so we were just talking about preventing resentment and the appreciation, showing appreciation, which I think would be an aspect of encouraging buy-in. But I'm wondering any other ideas on specifically the encouraging buy-in portion.
Yeah, so let me... I'm a big fan of teach a man to fish instead of give a man a fish, but also give the guy a fish because he's hungry and then teach him how to fish. So in this situation, Christian, I will totally give you a couple more examples. Okay. You eat these fish, but also, begin speculating. How would you inspire that? Most of the really good answers are going to come from you just sitting on top of that question and looking out. But what I like to do, and there's a couple other people in this room that I'm sure would like to add on to this. But one of the big things I love to do is I look at how do I involve my employees in setting goals and making decisions. So that is a massive one for creating a sense of ownership, aligning their personal and our organizational objectives, and then really enhancing their commitment to the outcomes. All three of my locations that I'm managing right now with the general managers, I have them playing something called short-term games and promises, which is where we have an event that is coming up, and every single staff member makes a promise for how many people will attend that event based off of their personal invitations. And they are not held to account for that number. I don't fire them if they get 0, but they play for 3 or 4, but it's something we talk about and something we play for. And they can see how their personal actions cause a ripple effect within our community. So that's one way. And then I also encourage them to just collaborate on the goal setting together. I have the head coaches meet with the coaches. The head coaches meet with the GMs. The GMs send out newsletters. So there's lots of cross communication that's happening so that there's no gaps. Listen to this. This is really cool. How I love thinking about it this way. Communication is kind of like Swiss cheese. And the goal is to have no holes. And if you take a slice at it, there's still going to be holes. So you have to do another slice. And then there's still going to be gaps. So you got to do another one. So you have to have multiple slices at communication to encourage people's buy-in and to make sure that they're constantly being related to as that accountability and also participating and acting as that accountability. So that's another way. And then the last way is I implement strategies to address concerns before they lead to disengagement. So I like to think that people start out engaged, and engagement can also be built, but also there's stuff that wears away at your employees that causes disengagement. And you want to attack it from both ends, Christian, and everyone else on the call. You want to both build engagement, but you also want to be attacking that which is eroding your engagement. And so a lot of easy ways you can do that are actually giving them opportunities to create that which they are tolerating in their position. Like actually explicitly say, hey, I want to What's the quality of this part of your job? How about this part of your job? What resources can I provide to make that easier for you or to make that better for you? And you really want to get interested in that. And an easy strategy for that is something you already said, Christian, as well, which is those weekly meetings. You can just have a little section in there where you're checking in on them. Hey, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to communicate with me anything that you're really putting up with about your job, or something that isn't working about your job, something that's causing you stress. Maybe you're thinking about it when you're on your way home. I want to just like be a space to receive that, and then get what they say. And maybe it's something, and by the way, I do this for all 3 of my general managers every week. I just check in on them, and usually sometimes, man, they're really stressed out. Nena, she would let me say this. Nena was like really stressed out. She was like, I don't know how X, Y, and Z is going to happen. And then I just like listened to her, took it all down in notes, and just piece by piece addressed how we would do it. And by the end of the call, she was like, I feel way better. Now I know what's happening, and now I know what to do. Some people like Quinn just require like a check-in and saying like, hey, can you just look over what I have planned for this? Quinn's the type of person that's like, I already have a plan for this. I just need you to see if there's any like glaring holes in it. And I'm usually like, nope, there's no glaring holes in it, because Quinn's really smart and awesome like that. So you want to find out what they need and then give them that resource. But usually it's just, hey, what do you need? Just that question. And then just really being there for them and being interested in that is usually enough. Cool. So I'm going to stop there. There's some fish, Christian. Does that give you some actionable insights and some ways that you can go about actually encouraging that buy-in?
Totally. Yeah. All good stuff. Thank you.
Sweet. Anyone else have anything to contribute to that? Nick, please, anything you'd like to say in that ballpark?
I mean, you already hit the majority of it with the nail on the head. So it was mainly just about actively asking them like, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything that I can do to help? How is your stress being managed right now? Because even if you as a manager are showing that kind of involvement with your staff, they're going to appreciate that in itself. And then they're also going to be a lot more willing to talk to you about that because they know they're being heard.
Yeah, so well said. Perfect. Yeah, perfect summary there. Cool. All right. Well, anyone else? Questions, comments, takeaways? Anything you'd like to say before we wrap up the call? All right, y'all. Well, I want to just acknowledge you. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. You could have been anywhere on a Friday at 12:30 Pacific Standard Time, and instead you were here on this call in a conversation for like really just like being a cool guy and gal and baby, like I'm a cool manager. I'm a person that actually gives a crap about my employees and, creating these effective communication channels. And also I'm the type of person that wants them to give a shit about their own personal development. I'm that type of person. Everyone on this call is that type of person. And that's so rad. I think that's so cool. And I really just acknowledge the crud out of you guys for being here. The next call will be 2 weeks from now, at the same time on Friday, which is going to be the 25th of October. And as always, if there's any suggestions or a section that you would love to lead on these calls, please reach out to me. And also, I do not advertise these calls, and usually we have like 10 to 15 people on them. But you're welcome to invite anyone that you think would benefit from these discussions. Any coaches, any staff members, program managers, head coaches, general managers, gym owners, anyone that you think would benefit from these conversations, you are welcome to extend a personal invitation to. We can just invite them to these calls. Is there any suggestions for topics for the next call? Anything that you're itching to talk about that we didn't really discuss on this one that you'd love to see some community engagement around? You'd like my take on something, anything like that?
Following up on job expectations, or if maybe their job performance isn't meeting the standards of making sure that that improvement can be shown. I mean, of course, there's constructive criticism, but making sure that they actively hear it and they don't feel like they're just being criticized.
Cool. So like the strategy and tact for approaching performance improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge conversation and is definitely something that we can dig into. Yeah, I appreciate that, Nick. All right, y'all. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone that contributed something to this call. I really appreciate it again. And with that, I declare this call complete. Have a great rest of your week and weekend.